To our first joint interview of today. My name is Barbara. Hello everyone, and welcome back for our first joint interview of today. My name is Barbara Moons. I'm a trade reporter at POLITICO. Before we start, I would just like to remind you to submit your questions via the POLITICO Events app. Once you open the app, you have to go to the item program, click on the relevant session, and then click on the tab Video Feed. You can also tweet about today's joint interview with the hashtag POLITICO Competition. I would now like to welcome our two speakers of today, Polish Minister of Finance, Tadeusz Kościński, and Swedish Minister of Trade and Nordic Affairs, Anna Hallberg. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning. Let's first begin with obviously the impact of the pandemic on trade. It has changed trade fundamentally. Some wonder whether it just has accelerated certain trends or really was a revolution to trade. Maybe Minister Kościński, you can start.
Yes, well, first of all, we're not certain yet where we are with this pandemic. We don't know if it's finishing or it's just quietening before the second wave. So we have to be very careful, and we don't yet know what impact it will have on our societies, on our economies, and our daily lives in the future. So we have to be careful to ensure that we can still have an open attitude to the way we look at the economy. Obviously, one of the major lessons learned is that to get out of this pandemic, this crisis, we all have to work together. It's not just a national situation or a European, or it's a global situation. So we all have to work together. No country can, even building a brick wall around its borders, is going to have to rely on its partners to work together. So solidarity is a very, very important part of going forward. As for the EU, parallel efforts have to be made. I think the various funds that have been created to help us get out of the pandemic very quickly and recover one, but we also need to have a very ambitious MFF, the multi-annual financial framework, so that we have sufficient funding to grow our economies and move out from the space we're in at the moment. One of the big lessons to be learned for all of us, of course, is that the lack of personal protection equipment. Suddenly in the beginning of the crisis, we realized we don't have sufficient quantities to protect our citizens. So we have to either increase our production, or we have to increase our stocks, or we have to build strategic alliances for imports. And of course, imports, you never know until it's too late whether your strategy is correct. So part of the response is going to have to be reindustrialization, especially for healthcare products, etc.
Yeah. We'll come back to that in a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, one of the problems, of course, if it's solidarity and we all need to work together, we have to have a very open market here in the EU, and a much deeper market. And we can't keep talking about having the single market and just repeating it, because just repeating the mantra that it's a single market isn't actually going to make it happen. We actually have to do something about some of the trade barriers we have internally in the EU before we can start working together and promoting our trade globally.
Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to that in a minute. I would first like to give the floor to Minister Hallberg. How do you see the impact on trade, and has it accelerated certain trends that were already happening in global trade?
Yes, definitely so. I think the conditions of trade have deteriorated dramatically as the entire economy has more or less stopped dead. We all seen that, and we've also seen that the borders have closed and production has decreased. And I think we all agree also that trade is a necessary and absolutely vital tool in the global recovery process after this pandemic. And we need to start to focus on that already now. As Minister Kościński said, we're not through the pandemic, we're not through the crisis, but we need to focus on the future anyhow right now. And I also very much agree on what Minister Kościński said. We need to be in this together going forward, because we have closed down together, which is not so surprising because it's been a very dramatic period for us, and the nations has closed down in a quite uncoordinated way. We need to coordinate our recovery in quite another way, and I think also that solidarity is absolutely key here. So I also think it's important to note that, of course, the trade was the global trade was under really huge pressure even before the pandemic, and this really this risk for there has been a huge risk. There is a huge risk now for the global trade to go the wrong way, so to say. And the protectionist forces have been even stronger during this pandemic, and we need to be very aware of that. And therefore, I know we can talk about that later, but I think we very much welcome the EU's upcoming trade policy review, because EU is could be a very strong force, could be really take the leadership in the recovery, where trade, as I said, is a vital part. And there we need to show way and take the leadership in that aspect, because
Yeah.
it's like a tipping point now, I would say, because if we go in the right open rule-based trade, sustainable trade direction, or if we close the borders, take home production, and as I see it, go in a deglobalized way, which is, in my view, and I think in many countries' view in EU, the wrong way to go.
Yes, you mentioned the new European trade strategy, open strategic autonomy. Some worry that this will lead to more protectionism. Is this something that worries you as well, as Sweden is a fairly liberal trade country?
Yes, actually, we've been a bit worried about the expression strategic autonomy, because that could be interpreted in many ways. And we would have preferred, and that's not a secret, we would have preferred to have the expression strategic resilience instead, because I don't see that we, from the government's point of view, can order or tell the companies to bring home production and how they should manage their value chains. But of course, we should be resilient. We have, as Minister Kościński so pointed out, we have been very vulnerable, and we need to be less vulnerable in the next pandemic. But that's not the same thing as being autonomous. So I think that's a bit of a challenge in that expression.
Yeah, Mr. Kościński, how do you look at this new trade strategy and the worries about more protectionism within Europe?
Absolutely, I agree with Minister Hallberg that protectionism is not a solution to the problems we have, and I do like the term autonomous strategic resilience rather than autonomy, because it does smack of that we're closing down our borders, and protectionism isn't the best idea. We need to have open borders, but obviously we ought to encourage fair trade as well.
And should the EU become more self-reliant? You mentioned the lacks of PPE during the crisis.
Yes, I think that's one of the lessons to be learned. That especially on medical products, research, etc., we should be much more self-reliant here. But also at the same time, we must build strategic partnerships because we can't be self-reliant on everything. So it's a choice that we have to both build our industrial capabilities, but also have strategic partners in various places in the globe, because as we can see, various areas can be closed down very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at the EU's trade policy in the world. This European Commission wants trade policy to be more effective in relation to pursuing European interests. Should trade policy do that as well, or should we limit it to trade only? Minister Hallberg, what is your view on that?
Well, I think if we can, as said before, if we can really show the leadership from the EU when it comes to promoting sustainable trade, and also one pillar is also the digitalization and the digital trade. I think that will then in turn lead to a higher level of competitiveness for the EU as well, because we should be, and we are in many cases very much in the front when it comes to the digitalization and when it comes to sustainability in the EU. And I think that should be the vital parts of the recovery, and where the trade is really in the center here. And in turn, then we can see that the EU really could benefit from this, and the industry in the EU could benefit from this. So I think it's not either or; it should be linked together to promote an open, free, sustainable trade. It could also lead to raise the competitiveness of the EU and in turn, of course, the prosperity of the EU. So that's really, it's not, as I said, either or. It should be really linked together.
And should this demand for sustainability in trade, should it also become more enforceable?
Yes, I think we need to see that the enforceability is, of course, always the last tool, and it should be there. It should be really, it should have some consequences if you are not in compliance with the sustainability regulation and so on. So I think that's very important. And also, not in the EU, of course, it's not really the point just to have that those kind of enforceability within the EU. We need to have it also on a global level, and therefore we must focus at the same time on the WTO, the modernization, the reform of the WTO, because it's so vital, not at least when it comes to sustainability, and I think also achieving the targets of the Paris Agreement and contribute to the green recovery. And I also would like to raise that trade barriers. We raised an initiative in Sweden when it comes to take away all the trade barriers on medical products. We call it Trade for Health, an initiative, which has been very well received and by the Commission. It will now put on the table for the G20 and the WTO. I think the EU should also have these kind of initiatives when it comes to take away the trade barriers and tariffs on climate-friendly goods, climate-friendly services, environmental technology, and so on. It should be easy to trade with these kind of very vital products for the climate.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Minister Kościński, do you agree on the need for more sustainability in trade?
Yes, absolutely. I think pursuing EU interest in trade is very, very important, especially on the Green Deal. I think we have a lot to offer to the global community, and I think we should be encouraging our trading partners to act in similar ways. Also, we should be using more of the tools available to us, like imposing a carbon border tax to ensure that other countries in the world are like-minded like ourselves.
And how do you see such a carbon border tax? There's been a lot of discussion how it should be implemented.
Well, that's obviously we need to still have more discussion on it, but hopefully it will be a part of the part of the funding for the EU budget, and we'll be top of the agenda in the very, very near future.
Okay, thank you. Maybe let's also take a closer look at our trade relations with other big players in the world. Maybe to start with China, today is the first day of the German presidency of the Council. The Germans are very keen to still clinch an investment deal with China by the end of the year. What do you expect of this, and how do you look at the overall relationship with China? Maybe Minister Hallberg to start with.
Yes, this is, of course, absolutely crucial issue. But I think China's growing global influence carries both opportunities and challenges. And I think also it's one of the most strategically important, and also one of the most challenging and important challenging issues that we have now on the table. China today is a really global geopolitical actor, and we should interact with China on that basis. We must sustain EU unity and pursue strengthened cooperation with China in the areas of EU's interest. And that includes, of course, trade and investments, climate and environment. And we should be straight talking on issues where we have where we disagree, actually, and standing up for human rights and rule-based international order, of course. And in the recent EU-China summit, we really could see and we welcomed an opportunity to convey important messages and reflecting EU interests and values. So I think we need to have a balance here. We see the challenges, but we also see huge opportunities.
And do you think an investment deal is still realistic by the end of the year or around that period?
Well, many timetables has now been postponed due to the pandemic, and in this case, it could also be other issues that could make it quite challenging to stick to that timetable. But I won't speculate whether it's doable or not. But it could be challenging.
Okay, thank you. Minister Kościński, how do you look at the relationship with China?
Well, of course, it's very, very symmetrical on the trade balance. Here in Poland, it's about 27-1. So I think the Chinese can do a bit more to implement their mutual obligations to allow more products from Europe, especially agri products into the Chinese market. We also fight unfair trade. So I think it's the state financing of various companies, and further down the line before the products actually get exported. I think we should come down much harder on this and encourage the Chinese to be a bit more fair. We should be moving away from these non-tariff barriers. It's obviously causing a big problem for us, and we need to assess how we go forward, whether we allow such large trade imbalances and investments coming into Europe, especially in some of the security sectors or the public or the investments which have effect on public order, and especially now as we can see how important the healthcare sector is and research. So I think there's a lot to be done to encourage the Chinese side to not so much to close the gap, but to come closer to the European position as opposed to encouraging us to meet halfway. I think they have a lot more to come and to meet their obligations. They need to come closer to us.
Yeah, when I'm listening to you, an investment deal by the end of the year sounds challenging.
Very challenging, yes, because there's so many different aspects that especially now we don't know what the new economy is going to be like. So we have to be very, very careful about taking long-term decisions when we're perhaps in the middle of an economic crisis. We don't know whether we're finishing or whether we're in the middle. So I think a lot of care should be taken.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from the audience, Minister Kościński, that I would like to ask to you. As you mentioned, the carbon border tax. One of our readers asked, how do you avoid the domino effect? And if steel becomes more expensive, will Europe's downstream products become uncompetitive? Will we need a tax on everything?
Very good question. I think obviously if you put tax on anything, then everything downstream becomes more expensive. But we can't have a sustainable climate environment without a cost, and that's going to be part of the cost. We just have to make sure we manage without any significant unexpected shocks. But that's going to have to be the price.
Okay, thank you. Before I let you go, one final question. You know that EU Trade Commissioner Phil Hogan has said as he won't seek a nomination for the WTO top job, he will remain Trade Commissioner. Does that leave the door open for other European candidates, or should Europe support a candidate for the WTO from another continent? Minister Hallberg, what is your take?
Well, first I say it's been mixed feelings that I received that message, because I think Mr. Hogan would have made a fantastic job on that position. On the other hand, we're really glad that we still have him as a trade commissioner. We very much share his view, and he's very energetic and engaged in the right direction. So, but with that said, I think it's very important that the EU can gather around one candidate. The candidate itself, of course, is the most important issue here. The background, the competence, the personality, the leadership, not at least. And whether we would find such a person, which I'm sure we could within the EU, that is available right now, that would be fantastic. But I think the most important thing now is that we can agree on one candidate, because we need unity now in the EU. And as I said, initially, I think this has been quite a challenging time for the EU, for the single market, for the trade within the single market. So we need to be unified, and we need to in these kind of issues, we need to really stick together. And in this case, I think this is such an important nomination. So we need to find, I see that we need to find one candidate we can agree on. But we don't have the name on the table yet.
Minister Kościński, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think our beliefs, our values are something which we can quite comfortably try to encourage the rest of the world to adopt. So I think a candidate from the EU would be a good solution.
Okay. And do you have anyone in mind?
No. No.
Okay, with that, I would like to thank you both for joining for this virtual event. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on trade post-COVID. To all of you, I would like to invite you for our next panel discussion on Europe's single market, which will start on at 9:40. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, you can answer a poll on our app asking, has the outbreak of COVID-19 exposed the weaknesses of the European single market? Thank you. Thank you, ministers.